Hey there, Sprats! In this video, I'm going to share some of my top tips for writing scene descriptions that'll have publishers and players hanging on your every word. When we talk about scene descriptions for tabletop role-playing games, what we're normally talking about is read-aloud text. So read-aloud text, it's a bit of a tradition in tabletop role-playing games, and it's easily the most common way you'll see of setting a scene. See, normal role-playing, it's like a conversation. Players ask GMs about the world, the GM answers them, back and forth until the magic happens. But read-aloud text it's kind of closer to narration. It's that moment where the GM has an important scene or moment they need to describe and everyone else is just quiet for a hot minute, and they sit and listen and align themselves all mentally with the world that the GM's envisioning. So, if you've read many campaign books in the past, you've probably seen read-aloud text before. It's all over the place. It's most often found at the start of an important location or an event. But just like all types of writing, there are good and bad ways to write read-aloud text. So, today, let's take a look at my top 5 tips for writing good read-aloud text. So, one of the most common problems I see with new writers tackling read-aloud text is that it's just way too long. Like, way too long. Like, I get it. As creatives, we have such a clear image of a scene in our head that we're describing, and we just want to cram it all into the player's brains, but really, in reality, the average person can only read around 100 to 150 words per minute. That's reading at a comfortable pace and leaving some room for pauses and dramatic flair. So we can start to see the problem here. If your read-aloud text starts creeping into 200 or even 300 words, it's just going to be way too long to use at the table. Anyone who has ever had to sit through a 10-minute exposition at the beginning of a campaign just knows how hard it can be to pull off and to sit through sometimes. Players need to stop all their role-playing and listen to what's being said, and GMs have to try and execute this long, unbroken script in a way that's somehow still exciting and engaging. So, we need to always remember when we're writing read-aloud text that we're here together to play a game, not listen to the GM read out an audiobook. So, when we're writing our read-aloud text, one of the things I always try to do is make sure it's short and evocative, and around 50 to 100 words at most. That way, when it hits the table, it should only take, on average, maybe about 30 seconds for most GMs to read to their players. They set the scene, then everyone gets back to the business of role-playing, what you're all here to do. And, if in doubt, we can always try reading our read-aloud text to ourselves when we're writing it, and just kind of pause, take a moment, and record it, see how long it takes to read aloud. Like, I'm personally always surprised with just how long it takes to read even a simple sentence or two. And speaking of simple sentences, nothing grinds a scene description to a halt faster than a weird word that somebody hasn't heard of. And again, I get it. We have these niche interests, especially if we're nerds. We love to use these cool words that we've learned over the years. But if a GM can't pronounce a word, or the players need to interrupt the reading for an explanation, then the whole thing is going to fall apart pretty fast. So we try to keep our words in read-aloud text simple and evocative, and try using flavorful descriptions instead of hyper-specific terminology. Rather than describing an elven fort's baroque crenellations, We can just call them wall-top defenses, like rows of golden teeth. It might take a couple more words to get the idea across, but trust me, it's way better than having a whole reading ground to a halt because someone says, what the hell is a crenellation? If I ask you to imagine your average roadside fantasy tavern, you can probably get a pretty clear image in your head, but what does it smell like? What sounds can you hear? And gods forbid, can you taste something in the air? One of the weird quirks about human imagination for most people is that it's very sight-driven. We tend to think in terms of shapes, sizes, color, and light. So when we're writing or describing our imagined scenes, we tend to lean really heavily on sight above all else. But we have 4 whole other senses we can play with when we're setting a scene. And weirdly enough, these are often the senses that make a place feel most real in our minds. The inn has a homey smell, a mix of fresh baked bread and earthy pipe smoke. The forest is ancient and quiet. Thick carpets of dewy moss squish beneath your boots, muffling your footsteps. Pretty cool, right? Always be on the lookout for ways we can use our other senses to make a scene feel more alive and immersive. Okay, disclaimer, this is a bit of a controversial one, but I personally hate measurements in read-aloud text. The room is 10 foot wide, it's 20 foot deep, and 30 feet tall, and in the center is a 5 foot tall sacrificial altar. No, I don't know about you, but I've never walked into a room and whipped out a tape measure and started going to town, finding out exactly how big the walls are. It's a bit of a weird trope that we find in a lot of older games. Normally old school dungeon crawlers, honestly. Those games, they cared a lot about the exact sizes and space and placement of objects inside a room, so it was really important to tell players all that information in the read-aloud text. It was so popular that I still see it creeping into text in 2023, but unless we were trying to replicate that very specific old school dungeon crawler feel, I'd really recommend against using dull measurements in read-aloud text and scene descriptions. Instead, we should be looking for flavorful and fun descriptions of measurement. The cell is cramped, even by Imperial prison standards. There's not honestly even enough room to fully lie down. If we know our characters well, we can even use their history and experiences to make the descriptions really personal. The statue in the city square is the largest you've ever seen. The tip of its spear could easily be seen over even the tallest buildings back in your humble town. This way, measurements are far more evocative and keep our players in the mindset of their characters. Of course, we probably want to keep all these precise measurements in our back pockets, ready to be used in gameplay if players start poking things with 10-foot poles or needing to know exactly how far their fireball will murder everything, usual player stuff. But we just don't need to make our players sit through a home report whenever they walk into a room. Imagine you're a player, and the GM reads the following. You hear a thunderous roar from outside. The inn's walls shake so hard that you worry they might collapse at any moment. You run to the window and gasp in horror as you see a wyvern descending upon the village. That read-aloud text might honestly seem fine at first glance, but it actually removes a lot of player agency, prescribing their thoughts and even their actions. Maybe the player is a storied wyvern slayer who wouldn't gasp in horror, but grin with anticipation at the sight of a scaly beast attacking the village. In my experience, this is honestly one of the most common pitfalls that new TTRPG writers fall into when writing read-aloud text, especially if they have a background in fiction writing, which is all about describing what characters do very prescriptively. And I think a lot of us honestly come from a fiction writing background, so it's fairly expected that these are kind of problems that we encounter. But as a writer or a GM, it's our job to set the scene and let the players react how they want to. The instant we take away that player agency, we're not really role-playing anymore, we're just reading them an audiobook. Luckily, it is a really easy fix. If our read-aloud text needs player interaction to move forward, we can simply break it up, describe the thunderous roar, then break and ask the party what they do. If anyone goes to the window or looks out the door, then we hit them with the next chunk of read-aloud text, the Wyvern reveal. It's an easy mistake to make, but our players will thank us for not stealing their agency, especially during those really dramatic moments where it's really easy for us as writers to get carried away. So there we have it. 5 tips to help you write great read-aloud text. In summary, we keep it short, we keep it simple, we engage the senses, use characterful measurements, and finally protect our players' agency. With those tips in mind, you'll be wowing your editors and players in no time. If you have any advice for describing scenes or writing read-aloud texts, or have any of your own questions about making tabletop role-playing games, drop them down in the comments below, and I'll try and respond in the comments or maybe even chat about them in a future video. Until next time, take care, Sprouts. Are we good? Okay, I guess now we probably cut to, all of the blooper reel. I don't know, are we doing blooper reels on this channel? What do you think? Should we do blooper reels? I do a lot of dumb shit when I'm recording. I mean, dumb stuff. You're not allowed to swear on YouTube anymore, right? Okay, I'm gonna stop recording now.